The ground shakes. Diesel engines thunder. 10 massive buses crawl up a gravel drive like an invading army. Hundreds of strangers spill onto a quiet pasture, banners snapping in the wind, children running, coolers banging, and at the center of it all a furious woman in a hot pink blazer gripping a megaphone. What she doesn't know is that the steel gate she just breezed through can lock with one touch, and she's walked her people into a trap. Before we dive in, if you love shocking real-life property and HOA drama stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the bell so you never miss the next jaw-dropping saga. The morning had begun in quiet, almost cinematic stillness. Pale dawn light drifted over rolling pastureland dotted with goats, dew sparkling on fence posts like glass beads. Inside the modest farmhouse, the owner moved through a ritual as steady as the rising sun, coffee poured into a chipped mug, boots set by the door, phone charging on the counter. For months, low-level tension had hung over this place like a storm that wouldn't break. Letters from the Homeowners Association across the road. Flyers mislabeling private land as community green space. Petty complaints about barn color and livestock. All of it orchestrated by one person. The HOA president, a woman whose name had become shorthand for intrusion and entitlement. She called herself a champion of community. The locals called her Karen. The pasture stretched wide and open, a sanctuary carved out from the creeping uniformity of the subdivision beyond. It was not, had never been, part of any HOA. It was an island of autonomy, fenced but welcoming, cared for but fiercely private. And on this morning it lay under a thin veil of mist, the only sounds the occasional bleat of goats and the hum of insects warming to life. Then, the rumble began. At first it was subtle, a faint vibration underfoot, like distant thunder. The coffee mug trembled on the porch rail. Birds startled from the fence line. The owner stepped out, squinting into the rising sun. Down the gravel road, dark shapes emerged through the haze, long and rectangular, crawling forward with diesel plumes trailing behind. 1 bus, 2, 5, 10. Charter buses, their paint glinting under early light, rolling side by side like armored vehicles. They slowed as they reached the steel gate, air brakes hissing, doors snapping open in unison. A flood of people poured out. Families with coolers, teenagers with portable speakers, retirees dragging folding chairs, even children clutching inflatable toys. Some rolled grills off luggage racks. Above them, a vinyl banner snapped in the breeze. HOA Mega Summer Festival, thanks to our generous host. The host was not them. In the midst of the crowd stood the orchestrator herself. Mid-50s, hair lacquered into an immovable helmet, lipstick red enough to signal danger. Hot pink blazer, clipboard clutched like a royal scepter, megaphone raised as she barked directions. To her followers she projected triumph. They had, she claimed, reclaimed community space from selfishness. But to anyone who knew the truth, she was leading hundreds of people straight onto land that wasn't hers. For months she had tried subtler tactics. Letters citing fictitious ordinances, accusations about unauthorized vehicle storage, and maps and flyers shading his pasture green as if it were already a park. When that failed, she escalated. 10 buses of residents, a full-scale invasion disguised as a festival. But she had underestimated the quiet man who owned this land. Weeks earlier he had reinforced the steel gate, synced its lock to his phone, and rerouted security cameras for full coverage. He wasn't just prepared, he was waiting. From the porch, coffee mug in hand, he watched as his pasture transformed into a chaotic carnival. Folding tables sprang open. Teenagers strung bunting between oak trees. Children chased bewildered goats. Some guests waved cheerfully, oblivious to the reality. Others avoided eye contact, sensing the tension. Among the crowd sat a familiar face, a county zoning clerk who had warned months ago about Karen's obsession. Even he looked uncomfortable now, muttering to anyone who'd listen that this was private property. His presence was a silent confirmation. This wasn't just rude, it was illegal. At 8:59 a.m., The owner's thumb hovered over the lock button on his phone. 1 more minute. He passed clusters of families spreading blankets, his boots crunching on gravel. Some smiled, thinking he was part of the festival. Others shifted nervously, reading the private property sign bolted to the gate. Then, at exactly 9 o'clock, he tapped the screen. A metallic thunk echoed across the drive as the gate's motors engaged. The steel arms swung inward with a heavy groan, clanging shut behind the last bus. The keypad light blinked red, sealed. Confusion rippled instantly through the crowd. Parents glanced at the gate. Kids froze mid-laugh. Even the bus drivers shifted nervously. All 10 buses now sat like barricades inside the entrance, cutting off escape. Karen turned, expecting applause for her grand entrance, but froze when she saw the locked gate. Her megaphone squealed with feedback. The first tremor of panic flickered across her face. The man leaned against a fence post, lifted his coffee cup, and simply watched. 10 buses. Hundreds of witnesses. Cameras rolling. Every second the gate stayed locked was another nail in her self-made coffin. The trap had sprung, and the show had only just begun. Heat began to press down on the pasture like a slow iron. The buses sat idling, their engines coughing out clouds of exhaust that drifted across folding chairs and picnic blankets. Where moments before there had been festival-style excitement, there was now a low current of confusion and unease. Parents shaded their eyes and stared at the locked gate. Teenagers whispered into phones. The noise had changed pitch. No longer laughter and music, but restless murmurs, the clatter of coolers being closed again, children whining for water. Karen's bright pink blazer flashed like a warning beacon at the center of the field. She moved constantly, pacing between clusters of people, megaphone in one hand, clipboard in the other. Her posture was still upright and commanding, but the edges were fraying. Every few seconds she cast a quick glance toward the gate, then toward the man by the fence post, then back to the crowd. She had built this spectacle to showcase power. Instead, it was beginning to look like a siege. Above, the owner's 4 security drones lifted from hidden docks with a faint electric buzz and hovered at different points over the pasture. Their lenses blinked like cold eyes. Children pointed, delighted by the futuristic machines, while adults shifted uneasily. The devices weren't aggressive, but they were obvious. Silent witnesses recording every movement. Phones went up like periscope. Teenagers balanced on coolers, narrating what they saw into live streams. At first they used hashtags joking about summer festival mishaps. Within minutes those hashtags mutated into hashtag #BusKaren, hashtag pasture prison, and hashtag HOA hostage crisis. Clips of the steel gate closing were replayed and slowed down with ominous music. Screenshots of Karen's flushed face circulated with captions about pink blazer meltdown. The story was already spilling beyond the pasture, drawing in thousands of viewers. Meanwhile, the man by the fence moved with deliberate calm. He wasn't shouting, wasn't gesturing wildly. He simply sipped his coffee, checked his phone, adjusted the focus of a drone, and let the cameras tell the story. Every second he stayed composed. Karen's narrative of selfish holdout versus community crumbled a little more. He had spent weeks reinforcing the gate and preparing for this day. What he hadn't expected was how quickly the crowd itself would turn. The first signs were small. A father in a sun hat folded up his family's chairs without waiting for instructions. A mother picked up her toddler and moved to stand near the buses. A driver climbed down from his seat and wiped sweat from his brow, muttering to another driver that they had been hired for a public event, but this was clearly private land. Even some of Karen's staunchest allies looked around with doubt flickering in their eyes. Heat intensified. The shade promised in Karen's flyers didn't exist. The bounce houses advertised never arrived. Bottled water was running low. Parents began murmuring about refunds and misrepresentation. The air of rebellion was subtle at first, a tension that hummed just beneath the surface of small talk. But under that tension was a growing sense of betrayal. The owner walked a slow line along the fence, boots crunching gravel, scanning his perimeter. He paused at intervals to check the feed from his security app. Wide-angle shots of the buses, close-ups of Karen's clipboard, time-stamps and location markers. Every file uploaded automatically to cloud storage. Every detail would be evidence if he needed it. He didn't need to escalate. The situation was deteriorating on its own. By mid-morning, the livestream numbers were spiking. Clips from inside the pasture hit social media trending lists with captions like, HOA invades rancher's land, and this guy locked 10 buses inside. Memes appeared showing a pink-blazered cartoon figure pounding on a gate while goats grazed placidly in the background. News outlets began retweeting the footage. Commentators speculated on legal consequences. Strangers who had never heard of the subdivision were already picking side. Inside the pasture, clusters of guests began migrating toward the locked gate, as if proximity might help. They gathered under the blinking red keypad light, staring at it like pilgrims at a shrine. Some pressed their hands to the steel bars. Others tried to peer through the gaps at the quiet road beyond. No one tried to climb. The bars were tall and slick, topped with angled crosspieces. The gate looked more like a fortress than a fence. Karen moved to intercept them, gesturing grandly with her clipboard. Her megaphone squawked with bursts of feedback as she addressed the growing crowd. But without shade or food or clear leadership, her voice landed flat. People listened for a moment and then turned away. The children were restless, parents were irritated, and the teenage livestreamers were gleefully narrating every misstep. Around noon, the mood shifted from confusion to open grumbling. A group of men dragged a heavy wooden picnic bench across the grass and rammed it against the steel bars in an improvised attempt to push them open. The gate didn't shudder. Its hinges were built to withstand livestock, weather, and desperate trespassers alike. The bench splintered. A bus driver shouted something sharp enough to make the men back off. Phones captured the moment instantly. "Jailbreak fail" scrolled across one live stream in bold letters. The man by the fence still didn't intervene. He watched the attempted breakout the way a chess player watches an opponent blunder a piece. Every failed act of rebellion underscored the same point. They weren't trapped by him, they were trapped by Karen's lies. The heat kept building. Exhaust fumes thickened. Children cried. A few families huddled under the bus's narrow strips of shade. Others sat cross-legged in the grass, heads bent over glowing screens as they updated friends or vented in group chats. The zoning clerk, still seated on his folding chair, eventually stood and addressed the crowd. His voice carried just enough authority to cut through the noise. He reminded them this was private property, that he had personally told Karen she lacked permission. Cameras swiveled to catch his words. That single statement, captured on multiple phones, hit social media within minutes and went viral, a county official confirming the trespass. Karen's hold began to crumble visibly after that. People drifted away from her orbit, forming clusters of their own. Some whispered about calling cabs or walking out. Others berated the bus drivers. A few openly accused Karen of fraud. Her pink blazer, once a symbol of authority, now stood out like a warning flag. The owner finished his coffee and set the empty mug on a fence post. In his mind he could already hear sirens. It was only a matter of time. He had called the sheriff early, long before locking the gate, and given a detailed account. By now deputies would be on their way, blue lights cutting through the heat shimmer. He imagined the moment Karen would be forced to explain, in front of her own crowd, why she had led them onto land she didn't own. Above, the drones hovered steady. One camera feed captured the buses lined up like giant chess pieces. Another focused on Karen's frantic gestures. A third scanned the locked gate, the blinking keypad, the frustrated guest. All of it streamed to off-site storage with redundant backup. All of it was evidence. By early afternoon the pasture looked less like a festival and more like an abandoned fairground. Picnic blankets were rolled up. Speakers silenced. Children dozed on parents' lap. The noise level fell to a low hum punctuated by occasional outbursts. The heat shimmered above the asphalt where the buses were parked, creating a mirage of movement that wasn't there. From his vantage point, the owner saw a picture forming, not just a property dispute, but a stage on which entitlement, deception, and consequences played out in real time. He hadn't needed to argue or shout. He had only needed to hold his boundary and let reality do the work. And reality was doing it faster than he could have planned. The internet was amplifying every second. Witnesses were filming from multiple angles. Karen's credibility was dissolving in the very space she had chosen for her triumph. When the first faint sound of sirens finally reached the pasture, a ripple went through the crowd. Heads turned toward the road. Relief flickered on some faces, panic on others. Karen straightened her shoulders and raised her megaphone again, but her voice cracked on the first word. The scene she had scripted was slipping completely out of her control. The man by the fence drew a slow breath, feeling the moment like a shift in air pressure before a storm. Months of letters, flyers, and petty harassment had led to this point. 10 buses, hundreds of witnesses, cameras, social media, and now law enforcement. The trap wasn't physical, it was reputational. And Karen had walked straight into it. He adjusted the strap of his phone case, glanced once more at the drones, and stepped back to let events unfold. The pasture smelled of diesel and trampled grass, of sweat and dust and faint goat musk carried on a breeze. It was chaotic and surreal, but it was still his land, and for the first time in months he felt its boundary like a living thing, visible, firm, unshakable. The sirens grew louder. Blue and red lights flickered at the edge of the horizon. The buses rumbled like restless animals. The crowd shifted again, pressing toward the gate in a restless wave. Phones rose higher. Streams multiplied. Comments poured in from strangers who felt like they were there. The pasture had become a public stage and a courtroom, and the verdict was writing itself. As the county sheriff's cruiser turned off the main road and rolled toward the locked gate, dust billowed behind its tires. The moment everyone had been waiting for, the moment Karen had feared and denied, was arriving. The owner stayed still, one hand on the fence post, watching, waiting, every camera rolling. He had written no speech for this. He didn't need one. The truth was about to speak for itself. Blue and red light washed over the steel bars like a tide. Dust rolled up from the county road and drifted across the pasture as the sheriff's cruiser came to a stop just outside the gate. For the first time since morning, the noise inside the field dipped to a hush. Children stopped crying. Teenagers lowered their phones. Even the engines of the buses, though still idling, faded into a background thrum. All eyes turned to the man stepping out of the vehicle. Sheriff Dale Patterson was tall and broad, the sort of presence that absorbed a space rather than occupied it. His mirrored sunglasses reflected back the chaos in miniature, the locked gate, the buses, the pink blazer, the restless crowd. He moved without hurry, shutting the cruiser door with a deliberate click, one hand resting near his belt as he scanned the scene. Behind him, a second deputy car rolled to a stop, its light bar spinning silently. The smell of hot diesel mixed with summer dust, the whole place now more like a film set than a festival. Inside the pasture, Karen's posture shifted the instant she saw him. The stiff authority in her shoulders returned for a heartbeat, as though she could summon back control by sheer volume. Clipboard clutched, megaphone raised, she marched toward the gate. Her pink blazer was blotched with sweat and dust, her hair frizzed from humidity, but she tried to stride like a conquering general. Her followers watched, uncertain, waiting for her to tell them what to believe. The man by the fence didn't move. He stayed in the same position he had held all morning, one hand on a post, the other on his phone, drones still hovering overhead. Every second of the sheriff's arrival was captured from multiple angles, uploaded to the cloud, streamed live to thousands. He had nothing to say until the law had seen the whole stage for itself. Sheriff Patterson stopped just short of the gate and took in the scene like an investigator walking into a crime photograph. 10 buses lined up like barricades. Hundreds of people scattered across trampled grass. A locked steel gate blinking red. And at the center, a woman with a clipboard, voice amplified through a megaphone, claiming this was community land. He didn't reach for the lock. He didn't reach for his radio. He simply stood, feet planted, and let the silence stretch until it became heavy. Then he spoke, quietly but with a weight that carried farther than the megaphone. His question was simple, almost mild, but it landed like a hammer. Why were all these people on this man's land? The words rippled through the crowd like a cold wind. Phones went up again. Heads turned from Karen to the sheriff to the owner at the fence. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She shuffled her clipboard, flipped a page, tried to gesture toward the field as though she could conjure paperwork out of thin air. Sweat glistened on her forehead. Her voice, when it came, lacked its usual force. She claimed it was community space, that they were exercising their rights as taxpayers. She gestured vaguely toward her followers as proof. The sheriff raised one eyebrow and extended an open hand. "Show me the deed." The clipboard froze midair. Karen's fingers twitched. She flipped another page. Notes from board meetings. Event schedules. Not a single ownership document. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. A few people in the crowd actually laughed under their breath. Phones zoomed in on the exchange, the livestream comments filling with all-caps reactions. Calmly, the owner at the fence stepped forward. From under his arm he produced a slim folder. Title deed, survey maps, tax records, letters from the county zoning office, all signed and sealed. He passed it through the bars. The sheriff flipped through it slowly, nodding once or twice, then handed it back. "That'll do." The murmurs swelled into open disbelief. Guests turned on Karen as if seeing her for the first time. A father waved one of her glossy flyers in the air, demanding to know why she had marked a private ranch as an HOA park. A mother clutched a crying toddler and whispered angrily to another parent. Teenagers chanted hashtags into their phones. The buses rumbled like restless beasts behind them, exhaust curling upward into the sunlight. Sheriff Patterson's tone sharpened, still calm but unmistakably official. He stated what everyone now knew. She had brought 10 busloads of people onto private property without permission. That was trespassing. If she had collected fees or dues for the event, that was fraud. His voice carried over the crowd, over the drones, over the faint bleating of goats at the far edge of the field. Each word struck like a gavel. Karen's face drained of color beneath layers of makeup. Her supporters, what few remained near her, drifted back. The zoning clerk stepped forward and raised his voice, confirming for all to hear that she had been warned, that she had planned this knowing full well she had no jurisdiction. That was the killing blow. The crowd gasped like an audience at a courtroom climax. Phones tilted to catch Karen's reaction. Clipboard clutched like a shield, eyes darting for an exit that wasn't there. The deputies began moving through the crowd, calm but firm, directing families back toward the buses. Slowly, reluctantly, the makeshift festival disassembled. Folding chairs snapped shut. Coolers clanged. Children were hauled back up the bus steps, whining about their unfinished games. The live streams showed the scene like an army retreating in slow motion. News crews had arrived by then, cameras poking through the bars of the gate, lenses glinting. One shouted a question about misused HOA funds. Another asked whether Karen had lied to her members. Her voice was drowned out by the diesel roar of buses coming back to life. Each engine's rev felt like a nail hammered into the coffin of her authority. The man who owned the land stayed quiet. When the sheriff glanced toward him, he gave a small nod. The deputies would open the gate one bus at a time, escorting each out under official supervision. There would be no stampede, no incident Karen could spin. Just an orderly retreat from a fiasco she had orchestrated. One by one the buses rolled forward. The steel gate creaked open just enough to let each through, then clanged shut again, sealing the pasture for the next. Passengers glared at Karen from windows, some shouting insults as they passed. Phones captured it all, the pink blazer shrinking against a backdrop of trampled grass and empty folding chairs. By the time the 9th bus rumbled out, the field looked like a battlefield after retreat. Trash scattered in the wind. Bunting shredded. Heat rising off deep ruts cut by bus tires. The goats, sensing calm, had begun to wander back toward the barn, their bells tinkling softly like a victory anthem. When the last bus crossed the county road, only Karen remained inside the gate. She stood alone now, clipboard hanging limp in her hand, her blazer stained with sweat and dust. She looked less like a leader and more like a ghost of authority, stripped bare in front of the very people she had tried to impress. The sheriff gestured toward the road, his meaning clear. Time to go. She hesitated, glaring at the owner one last time through the steel bars, lips moving without sound. Then she turned and walked slowly toward a waiting SUV parked just beyond the road. The deputy stayed a pace behind her, hand hovering near his holster in case she decided to stage a last dramatic stunt. But she didn't. She simply got in, the door shut, and the vehicle rolled away, pink blazer fading into the distance. The steel gate closed again with a solid clang, sealing the property back into silence. For the first time that day, the owner exhaled deeply. The pasture was littered with napkins, paper cups, and broken bunting, but it was his again. The goats grazed at the far edge, bells jingling in the breeze, oblivious to the spectacle that had just unfolded. On the porch, he set his now cold coffee cup down and replayed the sheriff's simple question in his mind. Why are you and all these people on his land? It was the line that had turned the tide of a months-long siege, spoken not in anger but in plain authority. Karen had staged a triumph and handed him the perfect stage to expose her lies. But even as he looked across the trampled field, he knew this was not the end. Karen was many things, but she wasn't a quitter. Humiliation hardened people like her. She would come back with lawyers, petitions, smear campaigns. She would double down. That was fine. Today had proved something even stronger than his steel gate. The truth, once locked in the open, couldn't be ignored. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ruts left by the buses. The pasture smelled of diesel and scorched grass, but under that scent was the stubborn, earthy smell of soil and hay, his land, his to defend. The drama that had unfolded was over for now, but another act was already forming somewhere beyond the horizon. Morning broke on the ranch with a cool clarity that belied the storm unfolding online. Dew still jeweled the fence posts, goats still grazed, but the quiet had a new weight to it. The pasture bore scars from the day before, deep tire ruts, trampled grass, scraps of bunting fluttering like surrender flags. In the farmhouse kitchen the owner scrolled through his phone, cup of coffee in hand, watching notifications roll past in an endless stream. Clips from the Locked Gate showdown had gone everywhere overnight, news segments, reaction videos, podcasts dissecting the bus Karen incident. Hashtags he'd never seen before trended across platforms. Hashtag KarenGate, hashtag Pasture Justice, hashtag HOA Fail. He hadn't posted a single clip himself. He didn't need to. Witnesses, live streamers, even one of the bus drivers had uploaded footage. Drone angles cut together with phone videos produced a near-cinematic retelling. Memes bloomed across the internet showing a pink-blazered cartoon figure shrinking against a giant steel gate while goats grazed serenely. Commentators argued over property rights, HOA overreach, and rural resistance. A simple act of holding a boundary had become a national conversation. But in the echo of that digital applause, the owner felt no triumph, only vigilance. Karen's face filled his screen even more than before. Not as an HOA president now, but as a guest on morning talk shows, framed as a misunderstood community leader. Her tone had shifted overnight from command to victimhood. She claimed she had been ambushed, that the buses were locked as part of a cruel stunt. She called the pasture a public right-of-way and insisted she'd been invited. Her words were polished, rehearsed, carefully aimed at sympathy. Clips of her tearfully recounting traumatized families, played side by side with footage of her barking orders through a megaphone. In comment sections, sympathy mixed with scorn. Some viewers believed her. Others posted county records proving her claims false. Lawsuits, she hinted, were on the table. Donations flowed to a legal defense fund she launched overnight. She'd lost the battle on the field, but she was regrouping online, casting herself as a martyr of rural hostility. The owner set his phone down and looked out the window at the scarred pasture. He had expected a counterattack. People like Karen didn't just retreat, they reframe. That was why he had documented everything. Each drone clip timestamp. Each trespass letter filed. Copies stored in 3 separate clouds, plus an encrypted drive in a safe. He had even retained the texts from the zoning clerk warning him in advance. He wasn't just defending land now, he was defending a narrative. Down the gravel road a van slowed and stopped. 2 reporters stepped out, carrying cameras and microphones. They didn't approach the gate yet, just filmed the pasture, its tire scars and scattered trash. More vehicles would follow. Local news, vloggers chasing clicks, even legal investigators. His property had become a stage, and he its reluctant custodian. He pulled on boots and walked the perimeter. The steel gate still bore smudges from dozens of hands pressing against it. The keypad light blinked steady green now, unlocked. The smell of diesel lingered in the soil. He passed the barn, checked the fences, reset the drones to standby. He wasn't hiding from attention, but he wasn't going to be ambushed by it either. That afternoon a certified letter arrived. Thin, formal, its language clipped and adversarial. It accused him of unlawful detainment and infliction of emotional distress on HOA members. It demanded immediate remediation or face civil action. It was signed not by Karen but by a law firm 2 counties over. A copy had already leaked online, sparking fresh debates about property rights. Commenters pointed out the letter never disputed his ownership, only his decision to lock the gate. Others speculated it was a bluff to shake him into settlement. He scanned the letter twice, then added it to his evidence folder. That evening he spoke quietly on the phone with a property rights attorney recommended by a neighbor. The attorney had already seen the videos. "You don't have a problem," she said. "She does." He wrote down her instructions. "Keep records, don't engage directly, let law enforcement finish its investigation." Online the narrative continued to churn. New angles of the event surfaced. A bus driver explaining he had been misled. A mother showing the flyer promising open park space. The zoning clerk giving a recorded statement about Karen's obsession. Each clip chipped away at her reinvention. Yet with each blow she doubled down. Press conferences, emotional interviews, accusations of digital harassment. By the 3rd day national outlets had run op-eds on the bus Karen incident as a symbol of HOA overreach. Rural radio hosts praised the owner as a folk hero of property rights. Urban commentators debated whether locked gates represented a larger cultural backlash. The story had escaped both of them and was now an archetype. Through it all, the owner kept his routine. He mended fences. He walked the pasture. He uploaded footage to secure servers. He replied politely to some reporters, declined most interviews, and spoke only through his attorney when legal questions arose. He felt the pull to defend himself publicly but resisted. Let the evidence speak. Let the truth travel without him pushing it. One evening at dusk, standing at the edge of the pasture, he watched the goats grazing among the tire ruts. Fireflies blinked above the grass. Beyond the fence headlights slowed again, a pair of sedans he recognized from HOA board meetings. They didn't stop this time. They drove on, perhaps delivering papers, perhaps just curious. The subdivision beyond the county road glowed with porch lights like a watchful constellation. He thought of Karen in her home, surrounded by legal pads and sympathetic cameras, plotting her next move. Maybe she was filing suit. Maybe she was rallying members. Maybe she was planning another spectacle. The buses had been a gamble. The lawsuit would be a campaign. He could feel it coming like distant thunder. Back inside, he opened his laptop and drafted a timeline of events from the first mislabeled flyer to the bus's arrival. He attached video files, letters, photographs, map. He added a tab for potential damages to his land. Soil compaction, broken fencing, veterinary bills for startled livestock. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't going to be caught unprepared again. At night he scrolled through comments on the viral clip. Strangers thanked him for standing firm. Others warned him about smear tactics. Some speculated that the HOA board might oust Karen. A few conspiratorial voices claimed the whole thing was staged. He closed the app and set the phone face down. The noise was intoxicating but dangerous. It could lure him into the same performance trap Karen had fallen into. On the fourth morning after the incident, a new email arrived from the sheriff's office. It contained an incident number, a brief summary, and a request for any additional footage he had. They were opening an investigation into trespass and fraud. He uploaded everything: drone angles, timestamps, screenshots, even Karen's own social posts recruiting attendees. As he hit send, he felt a small, quiet satisfaction. This was not revenge. This was process. By midday, rumors swirled online that Karen had been removed from her HOA presidency pending an internal audit. Screenshots of board meeting notes leaked showing dissent among members. Donations to her legal fund slowed. A rival board member posted cryptically about misuse of resources. None of it was confirmed, but the tone had shifted. The martyr mask was slipping. That evening, as a thunderstorm rolled over the horizon, the owner stood on his porch and watched lightning flicker behind the subdivision's roof. Rain speckled the ruts in his pasture, softening the scars of the buses. Goats huddled under the barn eaves, bells chiming softly. He breathed in the scent of wet soil and ozone. The drama still churned beyond his fence, but inside it the land was slowly healing. He knew Karen wasn't finished. People like her rarely stopped at a single defeat. But he also knew something had changed. She no longer controlled the story. Every step she took to regain power was documented, dissected, and countered with evidence. The trap she had walked into wasn't just a locked gate, it was public accountability. And that kind of gate, once closed, was almost impossible to open. The storm that had rolled over the county the night before left the air scrubbed and sharp. The pasture glistened under a washed-out sky, puddles collecting in the tire ruts like tiny mirrors. The goats picked their way around the mud, bells chiming softly as if nothing unusual had ever happened. But beyond the fence, in the subdivision across the road, something was breaking open. Early in the morning, the owner's phone buzzed with a message from the zoning clerk. A link to a local news report. The headline read, HOA President Suspended Pending Investigation. Beneath it, a photograph of Karen in her trademark pink blazer, but no longer defiant. The board had voted to suspend her powers until questions about the bus event and HOA funds were answered. The article quoted anonymous members who said they'd been pressured into supporting the festival, misled about the property's ownership, and told to keep quiet about warnings from county officials. The owner scrolled slowly, taking in the details. An internal audit had begun. A recall petition circulated online. The HOA's attorney had issued a statement distancing the board from Karen's actions. For months she had seemed unstoppable. Now she was isolated, her own allies slipping away. Outside, 2 cars slowed near the gate and stopped. Not reporters this time, but HOA residents. They didn't cross the fence or shout. They just stood on the road looking at the field, then at him on the porch, as if seeing him for the first time, not as an enemy but as a neighbor. One raised a tentative hand in a wave. He nodded back. They left quietly. By mid-morning, more reports surfaced. A whistleblower from inside the HOA had released copies of emails showing Karen had booked the buses and billed the costs to community improvement funds. Screenshots showed her instructing board members to describe the pasture as public green space, in flyers even after county officials said otherwise. The leaks landed like hammer blows. News outlets that had framed her as a victim now pivoted to talk of embezzlement and abuse of authority. The pink blazer became a punchline, a meme of arrogance undone. The owner read each report with a strange detachment. He hadn't leaked anything. He hadn't called for her suspension. All he'd done was hold his ground and share evidence with law enforcement. The rest was happening under its own weight, like a structure collapsing after too many hidden cracks. Yet the attention around his property was only intensifying. Reporters showed up at the gate daily, cameras trained on the steel bars. Some shouted questions about lawsuits, others wanted a tour of the pasture. Bloggers speculated about book deals, talk show appearances, even political office. The owner refused them all. He stayed behind the fence, tending his land, speaking only through brief written statements prepared with his attorney. He didn't want to become a character in someone else's narrative. But Karen was still fighting. That afternoon she held a live stream from her kitchen, hair loose, blazer gone, framing herself as a lone woman bullied by a land baron. She claimed the buses had been invited verbally by a community liaison she refused to name. She accused the sheriff of collusion. She hinted at a massive countersuit. Her supporters flooded the comments with angry emojis. Yet even in that stream, the cracks showed. Viewers posted county maps proving her claims false. Former allies asked for refunds. Someone pasted a link to the HOA's suspension notice. Her eyes flickered with panic before she composed herself. The owner watched part of the stream, then closed the window. It was noise. The real work was quiet. Law enforcement building a case, attorneys exchanging letters, the HOA audit grinding on. He had no desire to gloat. He just wanted his boundary respected. That evening, while the sun sank behind the barns, he walked the perimeter again. The field was greening under the rain, erasing the bus tracks. Trash had been cleared. The goats moved freely, their bells soft against the breeze. He paused at the gate and looked toward the subdivision. Porch lights twinkled like a grid of watchful eyes. Somewhere in there Karen was plotting her next move. In the farmhouse he added new files to his evidence folder. Screenshots of the HOA suspension, copies of the leaked emails, his attorney's latest note. He labeled everything meticulously. It was no longer just a defense. It was a record of how a small act of defiance had exposed a much larger pattern. He thought about the moment the sheriff had asked, "Why are all these people on this man's land?" That simple question had cracked the performance Karen had built. Now the crack had widened into a fissure running through the HOA itself. Whatever came next, lawsuit, settlement, countersuit, would unfold on that fault line. Night fell. Crickets began their chorus outside. In the subdivision a meeting was underway, residents crammed into a community hall, voices raised. Social media posts trickled out, blurry photos of ballots, whispered updates about vote. Around 9 p.m. a final screenshot appeared on his phone. The board had voted to remove Karen permanently as president. The caption beneath the image read simply, "She's out." He stared at the screen for a long moment. No thrill of victory, just a quiet exhale. The pink blazer had been a force in his life for months. Now it was gone. But he knew better than to think the battle was over. People like Karen didn't vanish. They reinvented. She would resurface with a new story, a new grievance, a new angle. And when she did, she might come at him through courts, through media, or through proxies. Still, the moment mattered. The land was his. The truth was documented. The community that had once dismissed him was beginning to see him differently. The fence held. He turned off the light, set his phone down, and listened to the night sounds of his pasture. Crickets, a goat shifting in the barn, the distant hum of highway traffic. Beyond the county road, porch lights flickered as residents returned from the meeting. In some small, unseen way, a balance had shifted. The story wasn't over, but Act 1 of Karen's empire had ended. Rain had rinsed the pasture clean, but the digital storm was only intensifying. By the time the sun rose on the 6th morning after the buses, Karen had reemerged. Not at the subdivision hall where her power had evaporated, but online, where she could still control her image. Her new account banner read, "Fighting for Community Rights." She released a glossy, professionally edited video titled, "My Side of the Gate Story." In it she appeared in soft lighting, no pink blazer, hair loose over her shoulders, a mug of tea cradled like a prop. Her voice trembled just enough to sound wounded. She spoke of families traumatized, of a private land baron using drones to terrorize children. She framed herself as a whistleblower silenced by corruption. Donations spiked again. In the farmhouse kitchen, the owner watched the video to the end without moving. He'd expected it. People like Karen didn't quit, they pivoted. The soft mug of tea was as deliberate as the pink blazer had been. She wasn't speaking to the county anymore. She was speaking to strangers on the internet who didn't know property records from property lines. Below the video, comments burned. Some offered support, others posted links to the deed and zoning letters. Still others accused her of grifting. But buried among them were signals of a new threat. A hashtag campaign demanding justice for the bus families, calls for a class action lawsuit, influencers amplifying Karen's narrative to their own audiences. The battleground had shifted from steel gates to screens. That afternoon, a thick packet arrived by certified mail. Inside was a formal complaint naming the owner as defendant, alleging false imprisonment, emotional distress, and defamation by digital amplification. It was stamped by a civil court in a neighboring county. Her attorneys had filed suit. Attached were affidavits from a handful of bus passengers claiming trauma. He scanned each page slowly, then set it aside. His attorney had warned him this was coming. "It's not about winning," she'd said. "It's about pressure." Outside, the land was greening again. The ruts left by buses were softening into shallow depressions filled with new grass. Goats wandered freely, bells chiming against a warm breeze. Yet the tranquility felt staged, like a set built around a courtroom drama. Trucks slowed as they passed, curious drivers snapping photos. Drones not his own appeared over the fence, strangers streaming footage of the infamous gate. The pasture was no longer just a private sanctuary. It was a symbol. He refused interviews. He spoke only through his attorney. But quietly he began to organize. He gathered every video, every flyer, every text from county officials. He photographed the damage to his soil, calculated lost grazing time, documented veterinary costs for stressed animals. He built a counterclaim for trespass and damages, brick by brick, like a barn frame rising from the ground. Meanwhile, the sheriff's investigation moved forward. Deputies had interviewed bus drivers, collected statements, traced invoices for the charters back to HOA accounts. The zoning clerk had turned over a thumb drive of internal emails. Rumors swirled of criminal referrals. Karen's name, once synonymous with control, now appeared in headlines beside words like fraud and misappropriation. Yet she remained defiant online. In a live chat, she accused the county of corruption, the sheriff of bias, the owner of being a media manipulator. She vowed to fight for every family she had tried to help. Her supporters flooded the comments section with angry hashtags. But cracks showed even there. People posting screenshots of court filings, donors asking for refunds, moderators quitting her page midstream. At night, the owner sat on his porch, the glow of his phone lighting his face. He scrolled through articles not for validation but for intelligence. He read think pieces framing him as a folk hero, as a villain, as a symbol of rural backlash, as a cautionary tale. None of them felt real. What was real was the creak of the barn door in the wind, the smell of wet hay, the steady blink of the gate's keypad light. The following week, he met his attorney in town. They sat in a small office lined with property map. She laid out a strategy. File a counterclaim, subpoena HOA financial records, request dismissal of Karen's suit on jurisdictional grounds. "You're not on defense," she said. "You're holding your ground." He nodded, thinking of the steel gate. A boundary, not a weapon. Back at the ranch, he set up a new security system at the entrance. Additional cameras, a discreet microphone, another layer of fencing inside the gate. Not to trap, but to record. Evidence was now his most important crop. The pasture could recover from ruts. A reputation, once distorted, might not. Online the story morphed again. Influencers posted side-by-side timelines of Karen's claims and county record. Podcasts dissected the legal filings. News crews aired interviews with bus passengers who admitted they'd been misled. Hashtags shifted from hashtag Justice for Bus Families to hashtag HOA Gone Wild. The pink blazer meme returned, this time captioned, "From boardroom to courtroom." Still Karen fought on. She hired a PR firm. She filed motions. She staged a small rally outside the courthouse with a handful of loyalists holding signs about land rights and community access. Cameras zoomed in on empty space between protesters. She smiled tightly into microphones, but her eyes flicked nervously to her phone as though checking donation totals. Through it all the owner stayed silent, tending his land. The pasture healed. The goats settled. Neighbors who had once avoided him now stopped at the fence to chat quietly, offering words of support, sometimes eggs or baked bread. A small, local solidarity grew while the online war raged. He accepted it with quiet gratitude but kept his focus on the slow work of documentation and repair. One evening at sunset he stood at the gate and looked out at the county road. The sky was streaked with gold and violet, the air heavy with the smell of clover. Beyond the road porch lights blinked on in the subdivision. Somewhere in there Karen was plotting her next appearance, her next accusation, her next turn of the narrative. He felt no hatred, only a steady resolve. She had turned a simple boundary into a stage. He would not step onto it. He would let the process unfold. The gate's keypad blinked green in the dusk. The steel bars gleamed with the reflected colors of sunset. The pasture behind him was quiet except for the soft tearing of grass as goats grazed. The legal storm swirled beyond the fence, but inside it the land held, patient, waiting. The county courthouse sat like a sandstone fortress in the center of town, its clock tower casting a long morning shadow over the square. By the time the hearing was scheduled, the Bus Karen saga had grown far beyond local gossip. Satellite trucks ringed the block. Reporters perched on folding chairs under umbrellas. Microphones jutted over barricades. A single locked gate on a rural pasture had become a national parable, and now its players were walking into a courtroom. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and old wood polish. The owner took a seat at the defense table, his attorney beside him. He wore no cowboy hat, no theatrical outfit, just a pressed shirt, boots wiped clean, and a quiet demeanor. Months of preparation sat in a neat folder at his elbow. Maps, letters, drone footage, tax record. Evidence, not emotion. Across the aisle, Karen entered flanked by two attorneys and a PR handler. Gone was the pink blazer. In its place a muted navy suit and a silk scarf. Cameras flashed as she walked. She paused just long enough for a sympathetic photographer to capture her looking upward, eyes glistening. Her remaining supporters sat in the gallery clutching signs about community rights and children's trauma. They held their phones aloft, streaming her every move. The judge entered. A hush fell. Outside the square roared with distant chants and the hum of generators powering satellite feeds, but inside only the ticking of the courthouse clock was audible. The first motions were procedural, jurisdiction, standing, evidentiary matters, but each word carried the weight of months of digital warfare. The owner's attorney rose and presented the land deed, county maps, letters from the zoning clerk, statements from bus drivers who said they were misled. She laid out a counterclaim for trespass and damages. Screens in the courtroom displayed still images from the drones. 10 buses inside the locked gate, Karen at the megaphone, children climbing fences marked private property. Each slide landed like a stone dropped into still water. Even the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Karen's attorneys objected, argued narrative, cited implied consent and public access, but the judge's questions cut through their rhetoric. Where was the invitation? Where was the legal right-of-way? Each time they gestured vaguely at community use, the judge returned to the deed on the screen. Black ink on white paper, recorded in county records, date stamped years before the subdivision was built. As testimony unfolded, new details surfaced from the sheriff's investigation. Financial records showed HOA funds used to charter the buses. Emails revealed Karen had been warned repeatedly she lacked permission. One message even noted, "Owner may call sheriff, bring cameras." It painted a portrait not of a misunderstanding but of a calculated spectacle. Phones in the gallery vibrated with notifications as reporters tweeted out each revelation. By midday the momentum had shifted completely. Karen's supporters in the gallery looked at one another, signs drooping. Her PR handler whispered furiously. One attorney requested a recess to review new information. Outside, hashtags flipped from hashtag Justice for Bus Families to hashtag Karen on Trial. Commentators who had defended her began to hedge, calling the situation complex. Memes of the pink blazer reappeared with captions like Community Hero or HOA Zero? During a break, the owner stepped into the hallway lined with marble and murals of county history. He sipped water from a paper cup and looked out the window at the square below. Satellite trucks, protest signs, goats printed on t-shirt. It was surreal to see his quiet life turned into merchandise. Yet he felt no temptation to perform. His role was simply to stand firm and tell the truth. Back in the courtroom, the afternoon session moved quickly. The judge denied Karen's motion to dismiss the counterclaim. He set a date for a full hearing on trespass and damages. He ordered preservation of HOA financial record. Each ruling was procedural, but together they formed a clear path. Karen's narrative was no longer controlling the process. Evidence was. When the session ended, reporters surged toward both parties. Karen paused in the doorway, trying to frame a soundbite, but a question about misused funds cut her off. Cameras captured the flicker of panic in her eyes. Her PR handler pulled her away, scarf fluttering like a retreating banner. The owner left quietly by a side door. Outside the courthouse, a small knot of people waited, not reporters but neighbors from the subdivision. They thanked him softly for standing his ground. One elderly man handed him a handwritten note of support. Another offered to testify about HOA intimidation. It wasn't a crowd, but it was a sign of something shifting at the edges of the story. The people once rallied behind Karen were now peeling away. He drove back to the ranch as dusk settled, headlights carving the gravel road. The pasture was calm again, the goats grazing in long shadows. He parked, walked to the gate, and rested a hand on the cool steel. The keypad blinked green. Above him the sky glowed with the first stars. Beyond the road, the subdivision's porch lights flickered like a grid of faint fireflies. Somewhere inside, Karen was regrouping, already crafting her next video, her next spin, her next move. But he felt a steadiness he hadn't known in months. The law had seen the evidence. The community had glimpsed the truth. The gate still stood, not as a weapon but as a boundary, holding space for patience. He walked back to the farmhouse, boots leaving faint prints in the damp earth where bus ruts were fading into grass. In the kitchen the notifications still poured in, but he set the phone face down on the table and listened to the night. Crickets, goat bells, a distant train horn. The noise of the world would rage again tomorrow. Tonight the land was his, quiet, intact, waiting for the final act. A pale winter sun filtered through thin clouds as the final hearing began. Months had passed since the day of the buses. The pasture had healed, its grass grown back over the ruts, the goats wandering as if nothing had happened. But inside the courthouse the air still hummed with tension. This was the day the narrative that had roamed the internet would finally meet a verdict. The courtroom was quieter than before. The satellite trucks were still parked outside, but the crowds had thinned. Karen's legal fund had dwindled. Her PR firm had quietly ended its contract. Only a few loyalists remained in the gallery, their signs now smaller, their streaming phones less confident. The owner sat at the defense table with the same quiet posture as before, a thick binder of evidence at his elbow. The judge entered and began the proceedings. What unfolded was less spectacle than procedure. Witnesses sworn in, documents entered into record, expert testimony about property boundaries. The sheriff's investigation file, now complete, was thick with invoices, emails, and sworn statements from bus drivers and HOA board members. It laid out a simple story. A private landowner had been harassed and trespassed upon. An HOA president had orchestrated a mass incursion using community funds. When confronted with boundaries, she had tried to rewrite the narrative. Karen sat stiffly at her table, face pale under muted makeup. She still wore the navy suit, but without the scarf, without the aura of command. Her attorneys raised objections, but the judge's rulings were crisp and final. Each time a drone video played on the screen, 10 buses rolling in, the gate closing, Karen at the megaphone, her shoulders tightened a little more. By midday, closing arguments were complete. The owner's attorney spoke calmly, methodically, pointing to deeds, letters, and statute. She asked not for revenge but for recognition of a simple principle. Private property is not a stage. The right to host a festival ends at the fence line. Karen's attorneys spoke of misunderstanding, of community good intentions, but the words felt hollow in the echo of months of evidence. The judge took a recess, then returned with a written decision. His voice was steady as he read. The court dismissed Karen's claims of false imprisonment and emotional distress. It found that the owner had acted within his rights to secure his property and protect his livestock. It ruled in favor of his counterclaim for trespass and damages, awarding him compensation for soil repair, fencing, and legal costs. He was also granted a permanent injunction barring the HOA from entering his land without permission. A ripple went through the gallery, some sighs of relief, some muffled groans. Karen's face flushed, then went still, a mask slipping over her features. Her attorneys gathered their papers without speaking. A phone somewhere in the back of the courtroom buzzed with the first alert from news outlets. HOA Karen loses case. The owner closed his binder and stood. No fist pump, no dramatic exit. He simply nodded to his attorney, shook the sheriff's hand on the way out, and walked down the courthouse steps into the cool air. Cameras shouted questions. He kept walking. Behind him, Karen exited through a side door, scarf pulled tight around her neck, slipping into a waiting car that rolled away without ceremony. Driving back to the ranch, he felt the tension unwind in small increments. The county road stretched ahead, the pasture rising at the horizon. He turned onto the gravel drive, the familiar crunch under his tires. The steel gate came into view, its bars gleaming under the muted sun. He stopped, stepped out, and laid a hand on it. The keypad blinked green, the lock disengaged with a soft click. The gate swung open. Inside, the pasture was calm. Grass whispered under a light breeze. Goats lifted their heads, bells chiming. He walked slowly along the perimeter, boots sinking into soft soil. The trampled ground had recovered. The land held its shape. It was still his, still private, still whole. In the weeks that followed, the online noise faded. Memes moved on to new subject. Articles receded down search result. Karen resigned from the HOA permanently, citing health reasons. A new board quietly settled the remaining claims. The buses went back to ferrying tourists instead of trespassers. The pink blazer became a cautionary symbol in property rights forums, a shorthand for overreach undone by its own hubris. Neighbors who had once seen him as a holdout began to wave when they passed. Some stopped at the gate to chat, to apologize, to share small gifts of eggs or jam. The fence line that had been a point of conflict became a quiet border of respect. The owner accepted it without speeches, grateful for the return of ordinary days. On a mild evening he sat on his porch, coffee mug warm in his hand. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the pasture. Beyond the county road the subdivision glowed softly, porch lights twinkling like distant stars. The steel gate stood closed but no longer felt like a wall, just a marker, a boundary, a line where one life ended and another began. The goats grazed in the fading light, bells ringing like small, steady notes. The air smelled of clover and earth. The noise of the world was far away now, a fading echo beyond the fence. He breathed in, slow and deep, and felt the weight of months lift. The drama was over. The land was his. The boundary had held. And for the first time since the buses rolled in, the pasture was truly quiet.